Fatigue is not just a weight on the shoulders, it's a silent scream within the soul. A tired man isn't defined by dark circles under his eyes or a dragging walk. He carries an invisible exhaustion, one that no good night's sleep can fix. His gaze reflects the weight of disappointments, the grind of daily battles, the lack of understanding the world insists on showing him. And still, he goes on. Because life doesn't wait. But how long can an exhausted heart endure without a little affection, without a gesture of kindness to reignite the flame of hope? Each step this man takes is a silent testimony to battles fought where respect feels like a luxury and empathy a rare find. Have you ever seen someone sit alone, staring into nothing, as if waiting for a sign of compassion? Maybe he gave all. He had over the years offered love without receiving, endured humiliation in the name of peace. The loneliness of someone always available to others is cruel. And yet, life's quiet wisdom teaches, even the weariest soul can find reconciliation. But it takes something rare these days, inspiration to keep going. Don't be fooled, fatigue goes beyond the physical. It seeps into the soul when respect becomes a distant memory. Still, there's something almost miraculous about genuine kindness. A sincere smile, a look of understanding, a simple, "I see." It might be the fragile thread of hope, keeping someone from giving up. If you ever cross paths with a man like this, don't judge. His greatest struggle might not be with time, but with the feeling that the world has forgotten he exists. He walked slowly, as if each step reminded him of all he'd lost. His shoulders slumped, hands buried in the worn pockets of his coat, eyes fixed on the ground. A man not just tired from time, but from a life shaped by silence and absence. On his face, the expression of someone who no longer expects much. It wasn't the kind of tiredness sleep could cure. It was the kind that folds itself into the creases of the soul, an invisible weight, slowly crushing. The world around him kept its pace indifferent. No one noticed that walking among them was someone on the edge of being forgotten. He sat on a random park bench, eyes staring at nothing. Maybe he was remembering a time when his presence meant something. Maybe he was just searching for a reason to keep going. People rushed by, blind to the man who once was a pillar to many. He had given love, offered understanding, forgiven more than he should have, and yet, here he was, alone. A dog approached, sniffing his hands curiously, and for the first time in hours, maybe days, he smiled. It wasn't much, but it was something. A soft breeze stirred the leaves. He looked up. For a moment he felt someone watching him. A woman, perhaps in her 50s, stood nearby, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and empathy. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice carrying more than words. It carried respect. He hesitated, then nodded with a half-smile. It wasn't the perfect answer, but who said a tired man always needs to have one? Sometimes it's enough just to be seen. He hadn't expected anything from that afternoon. Just another day, time slipping through his fingers, taking with it any sense of meaning. But something in the kindness of that woman cracked the monotony of emptiness. It wasn't pity. It wasn't obligation. It was respect. And for a tired man, respect is like fresh air after being underwater for too long. "If you need anything, I'll be around," she said before walking away. Few words, but packed with something rare, understanding. It was enough to make him look up at the sky, as if seeing colors that had long since vanished. That night, instead of collapsing onto the bed like forgotten furniture, he allowed himself a small revolution. He made coffee. Strong. Hot. Just like in the days when life still had flavor. He sat at the table, watching the steam rise from the cup. Smelling the familiar scent that brought back memories of better mornings, the loneliness was still there, the exhaustion too, but something had changed, something small, almost imperceptible, but real. A spark of hope, something inside. Him whispered, maybe, just maybe, there's still space for a new beginning. The next day he returned to the park. He didn't know if he'd find her again, or if he'd have the courage to say more than a shy good morning. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't let doubt stop him. He sat on the same bench, watching the people around him. A father playing with his daughter, a couple sharing a snack, and a group of young people laughing for no reason. Life pulsed all around him, and he realized he didn't have to be just a spectator. Hope, after all, begins like this, small, shy, almost invisible. But with a little affection, a gesture of kindness, it can grow into something much greater. Sitting on the same bench, he realized it had been years since he had simply watched life around him. No rush, no specific purpose, just existing. And in that moment of stillness, memories began to surface, like loose leaves carried by the winds. Of memory. He remembered Sundays, holding his son's small hand as they crossed that very park. His wife's smile, always saying that one day, when they were old, they'd sit there and watch the birds together. But time, relentless and silent, had taken it all. The son grew and drifted away. The wife left too soon, and he remained alone. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain the flood of emotions. But memories don't ask permission. They come like waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes overwhelming. He felt the texture of the yellowed pages of the book he read to his grandson before bedtime, heard her laughter in the kitchen as she inevitably burned something, and even smelled the morning coffee mixed with her floral perfume. So vivid, so close, and yet unreachable. The past seemed to mock him, reminding him of what was and what would never be again. But in the midst of the melancholy, there was something precious, the love he had lived. He opened his eyes and faced the present. The pain of absence was real, but the memories were also proof that he hadn't gone through life unnoticed. He had loved, had been loved, had built bonds that not even time could erase. And in a way, that realization was a relief, because as long as the memories existed, those people were still with him somehow. He took a deep breath, discreetly wiped his eyes, and noticed something curious. Life hadn't stopped. There was still a now. There was still a tomorrow, but to discover it, he would need to take a new step. He was still immersed in his thoughts when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Dad?" Time seemed to fold in on itself. He turned slowly, as if afraid it was just another memory playing tricks on his mind. But it wasn't. In front of him stood his son, now a grown man with the same eyes he saw in the mirror. His heart raced. How long had it been? 10 years, maybe more. Their last conversation had been cold, filled with unspoken resentments. And now, there he was, standing there looking just as hesitant as the old man sitting on the bench. The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. Neither of them quite knew what to say. The son took a step forward, then another, sat beside him, took a deep breath and said, "I came looking for you." Simple, but overwhelming. The old man blinked a few times, trying to make sense of what was happening. He had always imagined that if they ever met again, it would be by chance, some random coincidence. But no, he had been sought out. His heart, so used to beating in resignation, now thundered in his chest. I remembered what Mom used to say it about the birds. The words carried deep meaning. The old man smiled, a trembling but genuine smile. The memories had brought pain, but somehow they had also brought redemption. His son was there. The lost time couldn't be recovered, but maybe there was still room for something new. They sat there side by side, no rush, no pressure, just being together, something they hadn't done in so long. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. After hours of conversation, his son said goodbye with a firm handshake and a look that spoke louder than any words. He promised to come back, and this time the old man wanted to believe it. He stayed there, watching him walk away, feeling a strange mix of relief and melancholy. Something inside him whispered that this moment wasn't an end, but a beginning. Still, as he stood and started his walk back home, the emptiness returned to keep him company. The silence of the night felt deeper, heavier, as if life were reminding him that even when something is mended, there's still space between the stitches where longing seeps through. As he opened the door to his house, the smell of reheated coffee and old furniture greeted him. Everything was just as it had always been, every item in its exact place, and maybe that was the problem. The walls told stories, but there was no one left to listen. He walked to the small shelf in the living room, where framed photos preserved moments frozen in time. He ran his fingers over one of them, his wife, still young, smiling at the camera while holding their small child. He took a deep breath. That was where he always returned, like a bird to its nest. But it was an empty nest, where the echoes of the past felt more alive than the present. He sat in the old armchair and let his body sink into the worn-out fabric. He closed his eyes, listening only to the distant ticking of a clock. For a moment, he wished time could be bent, that he could return to the days when the house was full. Laughter echoed and loneliness was just a distant idea, but time doesn't go back. It only moves forward, relentlessly. And in that moment he realized it wasn't the past that needed him now. It was the future. All that was left was to decide whether he had the courage to follow it. The old man remained in the armchair for a time he couldn't measure. The ticking clock filled the empty house, reminding him that time waits for no one. But for the first time in years, that sound didn't bring him anguish. On the contrary, it sounded like an invitation. He got up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the quiet street was bathed in the amber light of street lamps. He saw a couple holding hands, a child running ahead of them, laughing loudly. Life went on, and he was still a part of it. A timid idea began to take shape in his mind. What if there was still something left to live? What if tomorrow could be different? Looking out at that world still in motion, he realized his story didn't have to end in that empty nest. Yes, the past was full of longing and regrets, but also full of love. And where there is love, there is strength to keep going. He remembered the encounter with his son, how his words carried something he hadn't seen in a long time, the possibility of reconciliation. He remembered the woman in the park, the dog that nudged his knee, the coffee he'd made the night before. Small details, but all pointing in the same direction. Hope, that quiet flame that once seemed extinguished, was still there. He took a deep breath and made a decision. It didn't matter how many years he had left or how many wounds he had carried. Hope never fades, not while there is a heart willing to keep moving forward. With one last look at the photos on the shelf, he whispered softly, almost like a promise, "I'm not giving up." And then, in a small gesture full of meaning, he picked up the phone and dialed. On the other end, a voice answered. And just like that, without even realizing it, he began something new. The next day, something had changed. Not the world outside. It went on with its hurried routine, indifferent to his existence. But inside him, there was a new rhythm. Instead of dragging himself through the morning as usual, he got up with purpose. He looked around and realized that his house, like his life, needed movement. He opened the windows, letting the fresh air into every corner. He grabbed a cloth and began wiping the dust from the furniture, a simple gesture, yet full of meaning. It was as if, by removing the marks of neglect, he was also clearing his own thoughts. Each organized shelf, each photo returned to its place, was a reminder that he was still there, and still had time to do something meaningful. Later, he put on his coat and went out. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but that didn't matter. What mattered was moving forward. He walked to the park, the same place where his life had taken a small but decisive turn. And there she was, the woman who, with one simple question, had sparked something inside him. "Nice to see you here again," she said with a genuine smile. This time, he didn't hesitate. He smiled back. He sat beside her, and for the first time in a long while, felt part of something greater than his own pain. The conversation flowed naturally, unhurried, unafraid. He spoke little about the past, and more about the present, the small choices that had brought him back. By sunset, he returned home with a lighter heart. He turned on the coffee maker, let the warm aroma fill the air, and allowed himself a new thought. The future didn't have to be an echo of the past. He had spent too much time believing his story was already written, that all that was left was waiting. But now he understood that wasn't true. The new doesn't arrive all at once like a violent wave. It begins in small gestures, in everyday choices, in the decision to get up day after day. And there, in that quiet night, he knew life still had much to offer him. The next morning he woke before the sun. He opened his eyes and for a moment expected to feel that old weight on his chest. But something was different. There was a thread of anticipation in the air, a nearly forgotten feeling that the day might hold more than monotony. He got up, made a strong cup of coffee, and instead of sitting in the armchair as usual, he picked up the phone. He dialed without overthinking. Had he hesitated, he might have backed out. On the other end, a voice answered. "Dad?" His heart raced. "Son, are you busy?" The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. "No. Actually, I was going to call you today." A smile slipped out before he could contain it, and just like that, they arranged to meet again. At the neighborhood cafe, he arrived first. He watched the people around him, young folks racing against time, old friends sharing stories, entire families gathered. That scene, which once only reminded him of what he had lost, now seemed like a reminder of what was still possible. When his son walked in for a brief moment, he saw that 10-year-old boy running barefoot through the house, always full of questions and never enough time. But now, standing before him, was a man who chose to be there, a man who, just like him, wanted to start again. The conversation flowed with pauses and hesitations, but without the weight it once carried. They didn't pretend the wounds had disappeared, but they didn't let them dictate the future either. Between sips of coffee, the son smiled. "Mom, always said life has a funny way of giving us a second chance when we least expect it." The old man nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Yes, life always finds a way. Sometimes through an unexpected meeting, other times in the simple choice not to give up. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment one thing was certain: he was no longer alone. The coffee between father and son ended with a promise. "Next time you have to meet someone." The old man raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but didn't ask. Sometimes life's best surprises arrive unannounced. And so a few days later, when he returned to the same cafe, he found not only his son but also a boy of 8 beside him, legs swinging restlessly beneath the chair. "Dad, this is Gabriel." The old man blinked a few times, taking in the scene. He had never imagined witnessing that moment. A grandson, his own blood, right in front of him, staring with the curiosity of someone eager to discover a whole new world. "Hi, Grandpa." The word hit him like lightning. How many times in his lonely silence had he thought he'd never hear that? He felt a lump in his throat, but hid it with a timid smile. Gabriel, without hesitation, pulled a chair close and began to talk. About school, about a dog he wanted to have, about a game he loved. The old man just listened, mesmerized. There was a piece of the future he never thought he'd touch. Every word from his grandson seemed to sweep away years of bitterness and fear, bringing with it something he didn't even know still existed: genuine joy. Time flew by. As they said goodbye, the grandson did something unexpected. He extended his hand and said, "You're coming to my game Saturday, right?" The old man looked at his son, who simply smiled, leaving the decision in his hands. For a moment, he felt that old instinct to retreat. But then he looked at Gabriel. He looked at the second chance life had handed him, as clear as the afternoon sun lighting up that cafe. And with a firm grip on his grandson's hand, he said, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The old man had never been a big fan of soccer, but that Saturday he was there, sitting in the stands of the small field, feeling his heart race with every pass, every run his grandson made across the grass. Gabriel wore the number 10 jersey, his eyes gleaming with excitement. The old man smiled. It wasn't just a game, it was something far greater. It was life showing him, almost symbolically, that he was still part of it. The cold wind hit his face, but he didn't even notice. He was locked in on every movement, cheering as if that children's tournament were the World Cup final. Slowly he realized that game was about much more than kicking a ball. It was about strategy, waiting for the right moment, making mistakes, and moving forward. Everything there was a metaphor for life itself. His grandson missed a pass and dropped his head, frustrated. The old man leaned forward in the stands and shouted, without even noticing how loud he was, "Keep your head up, boy, the game's not over!" His son beside him laughed. "Wise words, Dad." And they were. Because Gabriel took a deep breath, got back into the game, and a few minutes later made the perfect pass that led to a goal. The stands erupted in applause, and the old man felt something warm in his chest. When the final whistle blew, Gabriel ran to the stands with a wide smile. "Did you see that, Grandpa?" He nodded proudly. "I did. And you know what I learned today? The game of life isn't won alone." The grandson frowned, puzzled, but the son beside him understood perfectly. Years of silence had been broken, a family was rebuilding, and it had all started with a simple step. The old man ruffled his grandson's hair and looked at his son. "Thank you for bringing me here." He wasn't just talking about the game, and the son knew it. In the days that followed, the atmosphere between father and grandfather shifted between the warm breeze of civility and the tension of a thunderstorm that refused to break. The boy, sensitive in the way only children can be, sensed the discomfort in the air and tried to fill the space with funny stories, shared drawings and laughter he forced into existence, just to see if any would stick. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. One night, as the boy slept with his head resting on his grandfather's lap, the son walked into the room and stood there, silently watching. There was no anger in his eyes, just exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from the body, but from a soul that's carried too much for too long. "He likes you," he said softly. The old man, without moving the hand that gently stroked his grandson's hair, replied, "And I like him. He gave me back a part of myself I didn't even remember I had." The son sat down beside him hesitantly. The silence began to feel less hostile, more shared. "You know," he began, voice breaking, "sometimes I think I became the kind of father I swore I'd never be. I ran from what hurt, from you, from my pain, from my son." The old man, eyes brimming with tears, simply placed his other hand on his son's shoulder. No speech, no judgment. And in that clumsy, meaningful touch, there was more reconciliation than in any apology ever spoken. A few days later, the old man cleaned his tackle box as if he were preparing an altar. There was dust, rust, and a bent hook he claimed was lucky, even though it had never caught a thing. The boy was as excited as if they were off to hunt. Dragons! And the father went because his son asked, but also because deep down he wanted to try. They arrived early at the lake, the sun rising slowly as if not wanting to disturb the moment. The boy asked 1,000 questions a minute. He wanted to know if fish yawn, if they have school, if they like music. The old man laughed. A kind of laugh life had stolen from him years ago. The father tried to keep a serious face, but a trout leaping from the water caught him off guard, and he burst out laughing too. For the first time in a long time, they laughed together. No wait, no past. When silence arrived, it came beautifully, each one dove into their own little world. The boy fell asleep in his father's lap. The grandfather stared at the water as if hoping to see his youth reflected there, and the father, looking at the two of them, whispered, "Thank you." The old man pretended not to hear but gently squeezed his son's shoulder, and just like that, with no speeches or promises, peace was made. On the shore of some ordinary lake, among worms, bobbers, and unspoken love. They arrived home still carrying the scent of the woods in their hair, and quiet, comforting silences in their pockets. The boy jumped out of the car with a smile stained with dirt and sleep. The father followed behind, carrying the fishing gear, like someone holding onto freshly made memories. The old man stood there for a moment, gazing at the sky. Then he walked in, slowly, as if wishing that day would never end. Later that night, with the grandson already asleep, and the father washing coffee mugs with a certain unexpected tenderness, the old man returned from the bedroom holding a small wooden box. He sat at the table and slid the box toward his son. "It belonged to your grandfather," he said plainly. "And now it's yours, or better yet, it's the boy's, but you keep it for now." The son opened it. Inside, an old pocket watch, the glass cracked but the ticking still alive. "Why now?" he asked, his voice hoarse with the weight of understanding more than he could say. The old man smiled. "Because we only learn to value time when we start to lose it. And today I got a bit of it back." The son lowered his eyes, holding the watch the way one might hold a heart. And for the first time since his own distant childhood, he called the old man Dad. The next morning, the son slipped through the window without asking permission. The boy woke up before the two of them, like all children who haven't yet learned to bargain with their pillows. He tiptoed into the living room, bare feet sliding across the cold floor. On the table he saw the pocket watch, his eyes lit up as if he'd just discovered buried pirate treasure. He picked up the watch with both hands, turned it, shook it gently. He listened to the ticking and smiled, curious. Then he walked to the bedroom where his grandfather was sleeping and nudged his arm. "Grandpa, does this watch go back in time?" he asked with the most honest of intentions. The old man opened one eye, then the other, and took a deep breath before smiling. "No, my little one. But it teaches us not to waste the time we do have." The father appeared at the doorway, rubbing his eyes. He looked at the two of them, and without saying a word, stepped into the moment like someone who understands its worth. He sat beside them, wrapping his arms around both his son and his father. 3 generations, 1 pocket watch, and a new time beginning. And while the boy tried to figure out how to wind that old contraption, the two men just sat there, in silence, savoring the time they had finally learned to share. Years had passed. The old park bench was no longer the same, just like the boy, now a grown man. Brown hair, a calm gaze, hands weathered by life. He arrived early that Saturday, just as he did every year, and sat in silence. In his pocket, the old pocket watch, still ticking with the same stubborn rhythm as always, he looked up at the sky, took a deep breath and smiled. "Grandpa, I did it." He said it out loud, as if time itself were listening. Beside him sat his father, grey hair, a slightly stooped posture, but eyes still sharp. He didn't say much, but that day he gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Between them a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between those who have forgiven and been forgiven. And when Gabriel opened the watch and gently wound it, he heard the ticking echo once more. It was as if time itself were saying again, "There's still time, there's still a chance." And in that moment, there was no past, only the present. Only the now, only them. Right there, time belonged to them. And in the end, that was enough. Life always gives us a second chance, but how many truly have the courage to seize it? The old man spent years believing everything was lost, that the past was an unbearable weight. But all it took was a gesture, a conversation, an unexpected encounter to change everything. How many opportunities have passed through your life without you noticing? How many times have you chosen to look back instead of taking a step forward? Time doesn't wait, and life doesn't rewrite stories on its own. Are you ready to play your own game and change your destiny? The truth is, we all have an empty nest at some point, be it the loss of a relationship, a mistake we wish we could fix, or even a dream we've set aside. But what defines our future isn't what we've lost. It's what we choose to do now. The old man could have stayed in silence, but he chose to rise, make a call, and open the door to a new story. And you? Will you keep waiting for something to happen, or will you choose to act today? If this story touched you in any way, leave a comment and tell me. What new chance do you want to give your life? Maybe it's forgiving, starting over, or simply valuing those around you before time takes them away. And if you want to keep learning how to transform your destiny, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come along with me on this journey. The next step is in your hands, and it could change everything.